Good evening, everyone. It's good to be out. Had a good afternoon. I know that I got a little bit of a nap in, so I got to recharge a little bit, and everyone else, there's two other kids that took nap as well, but everyone else took a ride out on the side by side and had an enjoyable day. Tonight, I want to talk about being a willing disciple. So Thomas often gets a bad rap. When you think about Thomas, what's kind of the first thing that you think about? That he doubted, right? So, and that's not, that's something that's happened because of his actions, right? We talked about actions this morning. Because he doubted that Jesus had risen from the dead, that he was resurrected. He doubted that took place. He said, I will not believe unless if I physically see him before me. But I think that just based on that one time that he said that, he kind of got that nickname. And it's hard for all of us, I think, if we ever have done one thing and got a nickname because of it. And it's just one of those things where it's hard to overcome that. They'll always remember you as the guy that did this or the girl that did that, whatever the case may be. We had a cat, and if you want, I can tell you the story. I won't say it, tell you the whole story up here, but we had a cat, and my mom, she nicknamed him after he was the bub. And then, for some reason she decided to call him Bubbless. And it was just, a nickname that stuck with him forever. And that's just what we called him for forever. And, it's one of those things where you think about nicknames and they have a connotation to them. They have a meaning to them. And this is a nickname that stuck with him because of something that he did. But I think that as we go through a study tonight, we're going to not only learn a little bit more about Thomas and the kind of man that he was, but it's something that perhaps we ourselves can mimic. We ourselves can incorporate into our life and our servitude to Christ and be a disciple of his. Because there's a reason that Thomas was a disciple of his, and we can see and mimic those actions in our life as well. So if you turn to John chapter 11, this will be our first reading. And I do want to read the first 16 verses of John chapter 11. It says, now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. And therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And so when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death. They thought that he was speaking about taking just a rest in his sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. And then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us go also, that we may die with him. Does that sound like an individual who doubted Christ, who doubted the power that Jesus had? This is coming out of if you turn back to chapter 10, you'll see that they tried to stone Jesus. In chapter 10, verse 31, it says, then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. They chased him out of there. They were trying to kill him. There was one time whenever I'd lived in South Dakota, and I was on my way home for either lunch or just for the end of the shift. But there was some folks just out in the road tossing these huge, I'm sure you've seen them like in culverts and stuff, those big stones. There was two guys just like throwing them at each other. I don't know what there was going on, why they were having a disagreement, why it came to throwing stones at each other. But, I was scared going through there just because I'm like, they're going to ding up my car. They're going to bust through my windshield. I could get hit with one of these rocks. This could hurt. And so I stopped and waited for an opportune moment and just bolted right through whenever they were turning their backs to each other. But it was, yeah. And I wasn't even the target, but these two here were doing that. And I recall that another time where my dad was telling me about a story where he was driving to work. There was a strike going on and they were tossing stones at cars as well. They were chopping down trees. And he said that he saw them cutting down a tree. And if he hadn't pressed on the gas and sped up to whatever speed it was he was going, that tree fell behind him. And that wasn't even attacking him specifically. But here, Jesus is being targeted. He's being attacked. They're grabbing up stones to throw at him. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Would you know the feeling that comes by having your life at risk? They were with him. Jesus' disciples were with him. They were there. Thomas was there. He encountered that. And we see that they were reluctant to go because of this conflict, because of this, they had this apprehension to this situation. But when we read this, it was Thomas who was willing to go. Thomas was the one that had the boldness to encourage the other disciples that were there. If you also turn to Matthew, let me just throw that around. Matthew chapter 25 or 26 and verse 35. It says, and Peter said to him, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the disciples. You know who was included in that? All the disciples. Thomas was. So here we see a man who's willing to risk his life. Does this sound like a doubter in Christ to you? Does this sound like somebody has, reservations about who it is he's following, who it is he's serving? It seems like he knows exactly who it is. There was something Thomas had learned about Jesus through the past few years that he was with him that made him willing to forfeit his life in order to stand by his son. He was willing to do that. He was willing to risk his life for Christ. He wanted to follow him that badly. Do we have that same feeling towards Christ? Do we have that same motivation that we want to be his disciple no matter what comes, no matter what happens? Would we be willing to lay our life on the line as we see even Thomas, even doubting Thomas, was willing to do? That's one of those questions that each one of us have to ask ourselves. And then again, in the moment, when that takes place, when something may happen to us. In this country, we're blessed. We're lucky that we don't have to face these kinds of challenges, but there are Christians elsewhere that do. That persecution with their life is very real. And they have to make a choice. When they're questioned, when they're put on the line, when their life is at risk, they have to answer truthfully, or they have to renege. They have to back away and forfeit either their life or their faith. Would we be willing to risk our life for Christ? The next passage I want to turn to is back to John chapter 14. And we'll start reading at verse 1. It says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and you know the way. Then Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going, and how can we know the way? And Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So we see here, Thomas is willing to ask questions. And what's significant about that? We always say there's no such thing as a dumb question, right? Or a stupid question. We want people to ask questions. Why? So that way they can learn. If you're asking that question, obviously there's a gap of knowledge there, right? I don't understand this. How does this work? When Jesus says, you know where I go, you know the way. And Thomas is like, hold on, pulling up his phone, pulling up Google Maps. What was the address again? Where am I going? I don't have it saved yet. I don't know the way. I've never been there before. How do I get there? Jesus answers him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is also another thing that a lot of people have, uh, I don't know, looking at it this way. Our perspective is some 2,000 years later, right? To us, the answer is obvious because it's just been answered to us. We could have read all of these scriptures and we know that the words of Jesus make it clear for us. But it's still something that was confusing to those first century disciples, to those individuals that were even spending day and night with Christ. This was still something that was new to them. And Thomas didn't answer, or didn't understand. And so he asked that honest question. And that's what we want. We want honest questions. How many times have you had a question given to you sarcastically? And you can tell the difference usually. You can tell the difference between an honest question and one that is simply asked to goad you, something that is simply asked to annoy you. We can tell the difference, especially, when it comes to our kids, when it comes to, coworkers, when it comes to family members. We know the difference. And Jesus knew the difference, that this was an honest question. And we see that Jesus didn't rebuke or ridicule him for this question, right? How many times did we see that Christ had ridiculed individuals because of their questions? It was something that they should have known. But here we don't see that from Christ. We see that he understands this is an honest question because Christ knew the hearts and intentions of men. Several times he had been questioned, and he knew the intention of that question. This one was pure. This one was honest. Those are the kinds of questions that we should ask. Thomas, he wanted to be sure of what was going on. And I think sometimes we'll omit questions that we want to ask for fear of looking stupid. I don't understand, right? I know that that's something that happens a lot, at work. There was even times where, I did it because yeah, sure, I can do that. No problem. And then you walk away. What in the world does he want me to do? You understand, and you go to somebody else that you ask that question. You're like, what does he want me to do? What am I supposed to do here? And eventually maybe you mess up and you have to get instruction and you have to redo it or whatever the case may be. If we would have just asked the question the first time around, we could have done it right the first time. And that's what Thomas is doing. He wants to know the right thing right now. We should be willing to ask honest questions if we're going to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Questions are one of our greatest resources for growth, for knowledge, for spiritual maturity. When we take time to have Bible studies here and even outside of these four walls, at our homes, whenever we're studying with friends, with family, we should ask questions and we should encourage questions as well, that we can learn, that we can grow, that we can gain that knowledge. If you have a burning question that you want to know something, how many times do you need to know something and you start pulling up YouTube or Google? Google gets used a lot for questions, right? I don't know who the quarterback is for this, particular team or whatever. And you Google it and it pulls it up. It tells you. But the same thing can happen here at church with our Bibles. You can ask questions and we can study together and we can learn and we can grow. If we don't ask questions, we don't know what it is that we could share with one another to learn, to grow. And that's what we want. We want that spiritual maturity. Another thing about Thomas was that he was willing to accept the truth. In John chapter 20, starting in verse 24. It says, now Thomas, called the twin, was one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. You know what? Let's go ahead and back up. We've got a little bit of time still. Let's go back to verse, let's go back to the beginning of the chapter here. We'll just read a few verses here and then jump back to that. It says, now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple who Jesus had loved, and said to them, they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. And Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. And so they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes laying there, yet he did not go in. And then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes laying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who had come to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their homes. But Mary stood outside in the tomb weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting, and one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they said to her, woman, why are you weeping? And she said to them, because they have taken away my Lord, I do not know what they have done with him. Now, when she'd said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said to her, Mary. And she turned to him, Rabbi. Jesus said to her, do not cling to me, for I have yet to ascend to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things to her. Then at the same day, evening, being the first day of the week, the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews. Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, peace be with you. When he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. And so Jesus said to them again, peace be to you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. And the other disciples therefore said to him, we have seen the Lord. And so he said to them, unless I see his hands, the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. After 8 days, his disciples again were inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst and said, peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, Thomas, because you've seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Now, I know that was a lengthy reading, and I hope I didn't put you to sleep, but there's a point to it. How did everyone else react? What was everyone else doing? Especially when they were told he's gone. Jesus is not there in the tomb. Jesus had told them, right, that he was to be resurrected, that he was going to be resurrected. He told them. But here they are. And those of you that have lost a loved one, someone close to you, someone precious to you, know the kind of turmoil they all must be feeling at this moment. They know without a doubt this man was dead. They saw him die on the cross. They saw him buried. They saw Joseph of Arimathea go and prepare the body. They saw Nicodemus prepare the body for burial. They saw that happen. They know that he was dead. And now the tomb is empty. And so Mary finds this out and she runs back and she tells them that the tomb's empty. And what do? They have to see it for themselves. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Seems the same thing that Thomas has to do. Says, I got to see it for myself. So is he really somebody that's, an oddball out when it comes to his doubt? Or was he just like everyone else? Is he just like you and me when it comes to our doubts as well? I think every single one of us would believe if they saw Jesus and they saw the holes in his hands and where the Spirit entered his side. It would be very hard to refute that, wouldn't it? To see him there. But we see that Jesus said that blessed are those who believe who have not seen. That's us. We believe even though we haven't seen. But we see that these individuals who were there with him still had trouble believing in the resurrection. Thomas wasn't the only one. We've got a few more passages I want to turn to. Let's turn to Mark chapter 16, verse 11 and 14. It says, and they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her. They did not believe. Verse 14, later he appeared to the 11 and sat at the table. He rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart because they had not believed those who had seen him after he had risen. And there's several more passages that are like that in Luke chapter 24 as well. Luke chapter 24, verse 11 and verse 38 and 39. We're getting used to this Bible. Here's a new one. So Luke chapter 24, verse 11, and their words seemed to them like idle tales, and they did not believe them. Sounded like a story. They didn't believe them. Verses 38 and 39. And he said to them, why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I, myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. This wasn't something that was a unique experience to Thomas. He wasn't the only one who had doubted. But we see his response, right? My Lord and my God. His response says it all. When he was presented with the truth, he accepted it. This is what we should do as disciples of Christ as well. Whenever we're presented with the truth, if there's some fault that we have in our life and we're studying, we're looking into the mirror and we go, you know what? Man, that is me. That's what I do. I need to change that. When we're presented with that truth, we need to take action, right? We need to do what it is that we need to take care of that. Remove that sin from our life. Turn away from it. Repent from it. Get away from it. Get away from it. When we're looking at this lesson, what I see, because I don't see a doubter in Thomas. What I see is a willing disciple, someone who was willing to risk his life, someone who was willing to ask questions, someone who was willing to accept the truth. That's what I see when I look at Thomas. I don't see someone who's marked as a doubter, someone who that's the only characteristic about him that we know. Because we have recorded for us the response that Thomas gave when it comes to the identity of Jesus Christ. What about you? We have this opportunity now as well to say about Jesus, this is my Lord This is my God. So do you believe or do you doubt that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God? Right now, we have time and opportunity for those who need to make this confession. You could be baptized tonight. I'm telling you right now that you'll be able to sleep like a baby tonight if you do. Because you'll have put your life into his hands. He'll remove sin from your life. He'll remove that weight that's a burden to you. You'll know without a shadow of a doubt that if you were to pass away tonight, you would have a home in heaven. But believe in him. Believe in Jesus. If you have put on Christ, and there's been times and moments in your life where you are like Thomas and all the other disciples and everyone else who didn't believe immediately, who doubted. And we're still struggling perhaps with doubts in our life, questions that are coming up, and we're struggling with those things. Let us know. Ask those honest questions. Talk with us. There's elders here, there's deacons here. There are plenty of people who know the Bible that have answers that can go turn to the scriptures with you and find the answers to your questions, whatever they may be. I'm here now. I'm not the best, but we can look it up together. Let's grow together. If you have questions, if you have need for the prayers of the congregation, for support, for strength, now's an opportunity for you as well. So do you believe or do you doubt that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Will you make that confession tonight? Take a seat on the front as we stand and sing the invitation song.